So this is going to be a pretty different video than what I normally do here on Warrior Works. Jeff from CutleryLover, and if you're a gun guy, prepper guy, knife guy especially, I would check out CutleryLover. And if you're the kind of person that stumbled onto my page, on my channel here, you probably already are familiar with Jeff over at CutleryLover, but CutleryLover. But he did a really interesting video that sort of inspired me to do something along the same lines. Sort of on the same lines. And he just posted a video that was talking about how as an adult he feels a certain level of freedom he didn't have in his youth just by caring a little bit less about what people think about him than he did in his high school and adolescent years. And there's a lot to be said about that. There is a freedom in adulthood where you realize a little bit better, a little wiser hopefully, especially now in my 30s, my mid-30s, I would say this, that I think I have a better idea of what's truly important, especially, certainly compared to what I did in high school. And that little bit of wisdom, I think, what he was trying to impart on some of his younger viewership, trying to encourage them not to not care at all. That's an unreasonable and, frankly, a dangerous thing to feel. But to care a little bit less, and he phrased it in a really, really good way, and I don't know his exact words, but he says something to the effect that if you want to be a little happier, then care a little bit less about what people think. And that you have to do that intentionally. And what it made me want to do is, because initially what I thought, and whenever he was talking, is I sort of kind of looked at myself and I thought about how much I care now, what people think about me, versus, what was my frame of mind along those lines in my adolescence and when I was in high school, and even younger. I don't know that I have a lot of younger viewers out there, so maybe those of you who have people in your lives, they're in their teens and in those ages, maybe this is something you'd want to share with them. But I kind of want to give a brief, in a couple of minutes, just very brief layout of how life unfolded for me. I went to a very small school in Mississippi, where I went to the same campus from kindergarten through 12th grade. So in a school like that, your social status is pretty much selected for you by the 3rd grade. I didn't come from a family with a great deal of money, never wore name brand clothes or shoes. That was not something that was a priority in my family, for good reason. And so, like I said, by 3rd grade, I was sort of in the group of people that even at that age we sort of understood were a little different. I've always been kind of a weird guy, and people find it, I think, as an adult, people tend to find it charming, my idiosyncrasies, but at the time I always looked a lot younger than I was. I was always smaller than everybody else. So couple that with an obvious lower socioeconomic status and a kind of a goofy, clowny kind of guy, and looking younger, smaller, and all those things coupled together, frankly, just to be bullied. I was bullied from 1st grade through probably 10th or 11th grade. And, like I said, I'm in the same school with these people my entire life, and having been pegged as someone to be bullied at a young age, I had a very rough childhood because of that. I dreaded going to school every day, and I desperately wanted to fit in. Not just to feel cool, like I think in high school and middle school, I think everybody kind of wants to be cool, but for me, it was almost felt like how you would want to blend in the wilderness if there was animals that wanted to eat you. It tied into my very survival instinct. If I could just fit in a little better, I could survive easier at school. Like I wasn't going to be bullied and made and tortured, psychologically and in some ways even physically bullied in school. And, there were other home issues. I'm not going to say that I had a bad childhood at my house. I was never abused in my house or anything like that. But there were some issues, come from a divorced family, and that brings its own issues. But suffice it to say that I didn't have this great all-American childhood. And I went to school, I 10th, 11th grade, there were some positive altercations, if you want to call it that way, at school, and sort of got out from under the thumb of being bullied, and still sort of rejected coolness on its surface. It wasn't something I wanted, and was absolutely flabbergasted when I went to a junior college right out of high school and stumbled into coolness on some level. Like I had never been a person that was pursued by women. Like when you look, I mean, I'm 34 now, and people think I'm 22. So when you look at so much younger than everyone else, the people of your age, if you're 17, 17-year-old girls are interested in 25-year-old guys, much less other 17-year-old guys that look 15. So all that to say that I stumbled into coolness haphazardly in college for whatever reason, and it flabbergasted me that like I'm the same guy I was a year ago in high school, but for some reason it has appeal to people here. I was an art major going into graphic design. Was there for almost 2 full years and almost got my associate's degree in it. And September 11th really got under my skin, to say the least. Joined the Marine Corps sort of like on a whim. Ended up in a combat unit. Did 3 full deployments, but really sort of 4 deployments. I was part of the initial invasion of Iraq, OAF 1 and OAF 2, and went from Kuwait to Baghdad. Took Baghdad. So that sort of transition between OAF 1 and OAF 2. Did a UDP to Japan with the intent to do jungle warfare training. Did a bunch of stuff out there in Japan, training-wise, and sort of gearing up in that area of the world. They like to keep a presence for North Korea and all that obviousness. And while we were there, at the very end of that deployment, the tsunami happened that affected Indonesia and Thailand. Went to both of those countries as part of security detachment for relief aid there, and then came back to Iraq and did a full deployment in Fallujah with all the stuff that was going on there, and that hit OAF 3, OAF 4. And got out of the Marine Corps, stumbled my way into the private as a private security contractor. And worked my way up from a frontline contractor to now in corporate management, and I'm the firearms, defensive tactics, and chemical weapons instructor for a high-end security contracting firm. And I say all that to say that the people in my life now that have met me as an adult, they see this confident person who is sort of a man's man, guy's kind of guy. I'm good with guns and self-defense tactics and all these things, former military, and they see this guy that's super comfortable in his skin, love public speaking and all that kind of thing. And the truth is, I'm the same exact person in the most fundamental ways that I was when I was 14 years old and no one liked me. What's the difference? The difference is I'm around adults now. So if you're struggling with your self-image, or if you're struggling with bullying, or if you have a confidence issue based on what kids, and if you're 18, in many ways you are a kid, okay? I don't mean that to be derogatory or insulting, but don't let the opinions of children define who you are. The reason I think it's so important for you to have this perspective, or at least attempt to have it when you're younger, and like many things, that adults tell people that are in their adolescence, it's almost impossible to truly convey the gravity of how important this sort of perspective is until you've sort of lived life and sort of acquired that kind of wisdom on your own through osmosis and experience. But if it means anything to anybody, it's worth the effort. And I look at myself and I kind of look at the world I'm in and sort of, from a professional perspective, like what I do for a living and what kind of space I occupy in that, and sort of how I relate to my friends and just the people, especially the acquaintance people, the people that they're not perfect strangers, but they're not people that you really know well either. Those tend to be, in my experience, especially as a younger person, the folks that have the most power over you in terms of your happiness with where you are socially. The people that don't just come and go in an instant, but don't know you either. These people, the sort of other guy in the classroom, other girl in the classroom type of people, these sort of familiar acquaintances as an adolescent tend to have a great deal of impact on how you see yourself. And they shouldn't have as much impact. I look at those types of people in my life now, they think I'm cool. And that's not arrogance, it's just my experience. when I'm teaching a class, people are motivated by the things that I'm telling them, and they appreciate whatever experience I'm bringing to the table for them. And they put me many times on a pedestal that's not even really deserved. When you're teaching somebody something they desperately want to know or they find interesting, the instructor is often put on a pedestal. Like I said, undeservedly so. It just means that I've had more time to devote to something than they have. But I'm the same exact nerd I've always been. And occupy a vastly different place in my social world than I did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I'd have been 14 years old, which seems crazy, but I'm fundamentally the same person I was 20 years ago and occupy such a different spot in sort of the socioeconomic, if you want to call it that, or just the social world that I live in, without having to have changed myself. What changed, once again, was the environment. So, you should care what people think about you. So don't misrepresent what I'm saying. You should care enough, just not too much. And in some of the classes I teach, basic classes to our new officers that are coming in on board, I'll ask them, I used to, I don't do it anymore, I only do it rhetorically because I don't want them to answer the question because I don't want to have to embarrass them. But I used to ask the question, raise your hand if you don't care what people think about you. Because it's the portion of the class where we're talking about don't compromise your professionalism and your authority to be liked. So I'll ask them, raise your hand if you don't care what people think about you. If you really do not care what people think about you, raise your hand. And in every class I've ever asked that, whether it was 55 people in that class or 5 people, inevitably at least one person, usually multiple people, would raise their hands. And I would say, are you dependable? Are you trustworthy? Do you have integrity? Okay? And without fail, of course, those people would say yes to those questions. And I would remind them that none of those terms have anything to do with how you see yourself. If you're the only person in the world that thinks you're dependable, you're probably not dependable. You can't have a reputation. You can't be seen as a professional if you legitimately do not care what other people think about you. Human beings are social creatures. To the point that if you're in prison for the rest of your life without the option of parole, you are going to die in jail. If you get in trouble, how do they punish you? Solitary confinement. We are designed to be social creatures. We need social interaction. That doesn't mean that you need it all the time, that you don't want to go out in the woods every once in a while and just have the only voice you hear be the one in your head. But for long-term purposes, we're social creatures. We need social interaction. You think about people who lives extended amounts of time without social interaction. It either affected them negatively psychologically or they chose that because of some previous psychological issue. I mean, the Unabomber, for example, he lived in the woods by himself for a long time. Wasn't really right in the head, right? So there's nothing wrong with you caring what people think about you. If you're designed to be a social creature, then when we require social interaction to feel normal and to feel happy, and then you have to get along with those people. It's convenient as a social creature to have other people like you. You just don't want to care too much. You don't want to care so much that you define you based on how children, acquaintance children for that matter, define you. Because they have an agenda. You know, at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, you don't have the intellectual or relational or social maturity to fully navigate a hierarchy social structure and be able to lift yourself up without sort of pushing other people down. A lot of people don't, not everyone. But when you run into people who are constantly pushing you down, as tried and cliche as it is, they're doing that to increase the disparity between where they occupy space and you occupy space. If they don't feel like they can elevate themselves, they still want to feel the distance between them and you. If they can't elevate themselves, they push you down. They don't have the relational, emotional, or mental maturity to elevate themselves, to acquire that disparity, to be a champion, if you will. So they just push the people below them further down. Don't let people that are flawed, who are stunted emotionally, or just not developed yet emotionally and relationally, put in like psychological scars for you. You may find that the person that's easily and commonly rejected now in the world that you live in exists on a pedestal in the world that matters. And the world that matters is adulthood. I mean, if we just say, it's an arbitrary number, but it's something we can pick out of the thin blue air. Let's say adulthood's at 21 years old. Because legally speaking, in America, that's sort of when you're seen as an adult. Adulthood at 21 years old. For most of us, God willing, you will spend far more time after 21 years old on this earth than you do before it. Okay? So what really matters? What really matters is what your life is like and what your perspective is like after adulthood. But I run into people all the time that you can tell have these long-lasting after effects for how people helped them or harmed them into defining themselves inaccurately as an adolescent. So, to wrap all this long rambling up, one, I'm going to put the description in the box for you to go and watch Jeff's video at CutleryLover. I think it's a good video to watch. Probably better than this one, frankly. But for those of you who, as adults, struggle with an image that was created by children, take a step back and put that into perspective. That how you may be seeing yourself negatively was defined by children. We often, as adults, as a 35-year-old, am I going to let a 16-year-old define who I am now? No. A 16-year-old's perspective to me at this point in my life is largely and completely irrelevant. But I run into 34-year-olds all the time that are still holding scars developed by 16-year-olds decades ago. So if you are an adult and you have these scars, take a step back and put them in perspective and remind yourself what type of person created those scars. And if you're in that age bracket now where these scars are sort of developing in you, they're being put in you now, take a step back and remind yourself that these are children. Okay? I think some of the reason why it has so much power in your life at 16, 17, 18 years old even, is you want so desperately to see yourself as an adult. You want to feel like that your perspective is matured at this point. And it is in many ways, but in many ways it isn't. And so by believing that you at 16-year-olds or truly have the mentality of an adult, you attribute adult-like perspective to the other people in your world when they don't. They're not adults, and neither are you. So enjoy the fact that you have adolescence. You'll only have it once. And don't let people who are sharing that stage of life with you make long-term or even short-term impacts in major ways to how you see yourself. Because you're going to spend time as an adult, far more time as an adult than you do as a child. And I bet who you are right now, at your most fundamental core, will be completely acceptable to the people that matter in your life and the era that matters in your life. Hope you got something out of this. Go check out Jeff's video on CutleryLover. Subscribe to him. Subscribe to me. Subscribe to everybody. Have a good one.